At the company's couples gala, the boss asked my wife for a dance. She hesitated. I noticed. Her eyes darted to me before she accepted, as if waiting for silent permission, an excuse to give in. She did. The music was soft, but nothing about it was light. I watched her movements with him, small, but too intimate to be just part of a social dance. I saw his hand slide down her back, saw her eyes close as he whispered something close to her face. I didn't need to hear it. I saw it. And then, they kissed. Shameless, unapologetic, as if it were natural. As if nothing of me was still alive there. I stood up, calmly crossed the room, and said what no man wants to have to say, now you can dance as much as you want. And I left. I didn't run, I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I simply walked away with my head held high, leaving behind the love that didn't respect me. Leaving behind the woman who I thought knew me, but who, at the first chance to taste power, preferred fleeting excitement to the solid shelter we built together. In the days that followed, she tried to pretend it didn't mean so much. She tried to smile at breakfast, comment on the weather, cook the dish I liked. But it was all empty. The sound of her cutlery on the plate sounded like apologies. Her words were wet with guilt, but dry with regret. Until silence came. Not the comfortable kind that exists between people who love each other. But the kind of silence that screams. That betrays the presence of an abyss between two bodies that were once home to each other. She pretended there was still time to save what she destroyed, but I was already on the other side of the bridge, and the bridge was on fire. She didn't lose me when she betrayed me. She lost me when she didn't have the courage to hold my hand after the kiss. When she chose to protect the mistake, not the love. Over time, she discovered what I'd known since our first dance, he'd never wanted anything serious. To him, she was just a momentary whim. An available body amidst boredom. A distraction. Nothing more. There were no promises, no plans. When she tried to reach out to him outside of work hours, he was cold. When she sent messages outside of a professional context, he took a long time to respond. When she tried to talk about her feelings, he disappeared. And when she tried to pursue him, she found the door closed. Literally. He blocked her. He ignored her. He went on with his life as if she'd never existed. And then she fell. She fell from a place only she thought she was. She fell into the harsh reality of having been used, and the sound of her fall was the echo of regret. She tried to come back. She tried to find the place she'd lost in my eyes. She said it was a mistake, that she didn't know what she was doing, that she missed me, that not a day went by that she didn't think of me. She wrote me a letter. She called. She showed up at work. She cried. She said that if she could go back in time, she'd do everything differently. But I had already moved on. I'd cried all I had to cry. I'd felt the knife and learned to live with the scar. And more than that, I'd found a new perspective. A new beginning. A calm yet intense love. A smile that didn't hide venom. A touch that didn't tremble with guilt. She saw it. She saw me whole with another woman, while she became a piece of herself. She saw me walk lightly, while she stumbled over excuses. She saw me start over, while she stood at the point where everything fell apart. One day, she decided to look for me again. No longer to ask, but to understand. She asked if I hated her. I said no. She said she thought about me every night. She said everything we'd experienced was real. I said I'd also thought about her a lot, but now I think about it with gratitude, because without the pain she'd caused, I might never have allowed myself to find something greater. She said she still loved me. I said I forgave to feel lighter, not to go back. She cried. And I didn't cry anymore. Because my peace no longer fit in the same house where our pain had lived. And the story we had? It became a closed book on the shelf. She still tries to reread it, but I'm already writing another. And then something happened that even I didn't expect. One day, returning home after a weekend with my new partner, I parked the car on the street where I'd lived for so many years and saw her. She was sitting on the steps of the old porch, hugging a photo album. She was thin. Her gaze was lost. Her hand trembled as she held a picture of us, smiling on the beach where I'd proposed. When she saw me, she didn't stand. She just looked up and whispered something that the wind almost carried away. I never imagined losing you would hurt more than anything I've ever felt. I remained silent for seconds that felt like hours. Then, with the calm voice I'd learned to cultivate after the chaos, I said, pain is proportional to choice. In the following days, I learned from mutual friends that she had withdrawn from everything. She lived in isolation. She didn't speak to her mother. She avoided her classmates. She refused invitations. She went back to living alone. And every now and then she would ask about me, always as discreetly as possible. But he never had the courage to actually look for me. Because he knew that, even if we met, the place that was once hers was already someone else's. Not out of revenge. But out of deservedness. Because after everything, I deserved to be happy. And she was left with the emptiness of the choice she made. However, what no one expected was that fate still had one last dance in store. Because, weeks later, when everything seemed buried, when peace had finally settled into our separate lives, chance brought us together in the most cruel and unexpected way possible. And in that encounter, as symbolic as it was brutal, something happened that would forever change the way each of us viewed everything we had experienced. Because the pain of betrayal can hurt. But the pain of realizing the love of your life has moved on, no one teaches you how to bear that. Welcome to the channel. Here, we don't romanticize and we never support any form of betrayal. The stories you will hear are fictional, but they reflect profound truths. Betrayal destroys homes, corrodes true loves and leaves scars that time cannot erase. Our purpose is clear, to show how one wrong choice can change everything forever. Brace yourself. What follows is a story. Shocking, intense and impossible to forget. They met on an autumn Saturday, when the leaves were falling slowly and the cold wind forced people to walk closer together. The cafe was full, but there was only one empty table. He offered it, and she accepted. His eyes, dark and attentive, captured the restrained way she smiled, as if accustomed to hiding the truths of her heart. Her name was Emily, and his, Daniel. From that first meeting, something between them seemed to pulse serenely yet intensely, as if their stories had crossed paths in another life and were now merely picking up the loose thread of an unfinished narrative. They were in no rush. They built their intimacy through the quiet details, a joke shared between sips of tea, a late-day phone call just to hear the other breathing, a note left under the pillow. Daniel fell in love with the way Emily talked about the books she read, how she cried watching old movies, and how she ran her hands through her hair when she got nervous. Emily was enchanted by Daniel's calm, by his firmness without harshness, by his sensitivity hidden in small gestures, like when he brought her flowers even without a special date or washed the dishes while she took a bath. Over time, their lives began to intertwine naturally. Emily began leaving clothes at Daniel's house, and Daniel exchanged the kitchen glasses for models she preferred. They were young adults with real fears and achievable plans. There were no epic promises, but there was presence. And that was what sustained them during their early years, constancy. The fights that occurred, and there were many, came with force, but also with a desire for reconciliation. They knew how to communicate, even when their voices trembled. They knew how to apologize, even when their pride was wounded. They knew that love was much more than saying, "I love you," it was also knowing how to stay when the other person was unbearable, it was having patience when the outside world demanded haste. They lived together for 2 years before deciding to make their union official. The wedding was small, surrounded by close friends and family. No ostentation. Just truth. Emily wore a simple dress, without a veil, and Daniel wore a suit inherited from his father. At the altar, she promised loyalty, and he, respect. Everyone cried. including them. The following years were a candid portrait of the reality of a modern couple. They shared the bills, the grocery shopping, the invoices, and the silences. They had routines that were sometimes tiring, but also offered security. Emily would wake up early to review reports while enjoying her first coffee of the day. Daniel would leave a little later to brave the traffic to the office. At night, they would have dinner together, even when their moods left them on opposite sides of the table. On weekends, they would travel to nearby cities, visit their parents, or simply sleep in and watch TV shows in the living room. There was nothing grand, but there was everything. The complicity lay in the hidden gestures of everyday life. Emily tended to the plants Daniel forgot about. Daniel changed the light bulbs that burned out without her asking. When one was sick, the other was there with tea and blankets. When one had a bad day, the other listened unhurriedly. Emily began to rise in her career. Her organizational skills and emotional intelligence caught the attention of important executives. She received praise, invitations to larger meetings, corporate events, and training sessions in other cities. Daniel, proud, supported her enthusiastically. He believed in her talent. He was never bothered by Emily's brilliance. On the contrary, he found it inspiring. She, in turn, admired Daniel's emotional stability, his calm way of approaching life without losing the intensity of his emotions. They didn't compete. They never needed to. They shared victories like sharing a blanket on a cold night. One pulled, the other gave. In the last few months, however, something began to change. Not a sudden break, but small, almost invisible cracks that had been forming over the weeks. Emily's work was demanding more and more of her time, and she seemed more absent even when she was present. Daniel, for his part, was spending more time alone at home and began to sink too deeply into silence, trying to figure out if it was just a phase or the beginning of something he couldn't quite name. Conversations became shorter, touches more spaced out. There was still love, he could have sworn there was, but there was also a strange feeling, as if they were living in different houses within the same house. Even so, they persisted. Emily still laughed at Daniel's jokes, albeit less brightly. Daniel still made her coffee in the morning, even if she was too rushed to notice. It was as if they were both trying to keep a flame alive that stubbornly flickered. Neither wanted to be the first to acknowledge that something was off. They were afraid to broach the subject, as if by naming it they were decreeing its existence. But distance isn't spoken of with words, it announces itself in the space between bodies, in eyes that avoid contact, in delayed texts, in silent dinners. One night, while Daniel was washing the dishes, he heard Emily talking on the phone in the bedroom. Her voice was soft, sweeter than it had been with him lately. He couldn't hear exactly what she was saying, but her tone was enough to make him uneasy. Not out of jealousy, but instinct. When she left the room, Daniel asked if everything was okay. She smiled and said she was just a colleague from work, organizing an event for the following month. He wanted to believe her. And he did. Because that's what love is all about, giving the benefit of the doubt even when something inside you screams for answers. Daniel would rather silence that scream than jeopardize what they'd built. The following month, the invitation arrived to Emily's company's couples party, a gala evening, formal attire, attended by executives and family. Emily seemed excited, carefully choosing her dress, having her nails done, and spending more time than usual on her hair. Daniel thought it was cute to see her excited. She looked beautiful. When they arrived at the event, all eyes were on her. It was impossible not to notice Emily's presence. She seemed to belong in that atmosphere of glitter and crystal glasses. Daniel stayed by her side the entire time, but he couldn't help but notice how some people ignored him, talking to Emily as if he were just a silent companion. Despite this, he remained calm and smiling. He knew she was in her element. And he made a point of supporting her. They danced once, took pictures together, toasted with colleagues, and spent a good deal of time chatting with some old friends who were also present. Emily seemed torn between two worlds, one in which Daniel was the center and another in which he was merely a distant satellite. Still, she introduced him affectionately, called him my husband, laughed at the stories he told, and held his hand between conversations. If there was something off, it was still too subtle to name. That night, when they returned home, Daniel watched her take off her earrings in front of the mirror, still in her dress. He asked if she was happy. Emily said yes, that the night had been wonderful. He hugged her from behind, kissed her shoulder, and told her he was proud of her. She nodded silently. A silence Daniel didn't understand right away, but would later remember vividly. Because that night, something began to die, and neither of them noticed. Or maybe they did. Maybe they just chose not to see it. Because admitting the end hurts more than pretending there was still something. In the following days, everything remained almost the same. But almost is a treacherous word. Emily seemed more introspective. Sometimes she smiled to herself in front of her phone. Other times she arrived late and said she was overwhelmed with the new project she'd taken on. Daniel, for his part, immersed himself even more in his work, as a way to avoid the constant nagging feeling that something was slipping through his fingers. There were still dinners, there were still goodnight kisses. But the warmth of these gestures was lukewarm. Like a fireplace lit just for show. The house was too quiet to be healthy. And yet, there was love. Or at least, there was enough memory of it to sustain the rituals. Emily still folded his clothes carefully. Daniel still left her the last piece of pie. But there was a lingering absence. An absence no one dared name. And this silence, this abyss shaped like a routine, was the harbinger of something that would soon surface. Something that would change everything. Because love can survive a lot. But it doesn't always survive those who betray it. It was a cloudy Tuesday when he arrived home early. Traffic was unusually light, and his client meeting had been cancelled at the last minute. He opened the door with the same key as always, stepped onto the same rug she'd chosen one weekend, and noticed that the scent of her perfume still lingered in the air. The house was silent. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort, doesn't lull one to rest, but rather betrays something out of place. He called out to her, but there was no answer. He thought she might be in the shower, or concentrating on something in her bedroom. He walked to the kitchen, got a glass of water, and was preparing to go upstairs when he heard muffled laughter coming from upstairs. Instinctively, he stopped. He stood still for a few seconds, trying to rationalize what he'd heard, until he realized that the laughter wasn't familiar. At least not in that tone, not at that volume. He went upstairs slowly, his heart racing for no clear reason, or perhaps with all the reasons, but not yet named. As he approached the room, the door was ajar. And it only took one more step for him to see, without warning, what no one should see. She was there, with her boss. The same man who months earlier had praised his wife at social events, who greeted Daniel with a cynical smile and lukewarm handshakes. Now, he was sitting on the bed, his shirt open, her hair still wet from the shower. When they saw him, the laughter stopped. She jumped up, as if waking from a nightmare, trying to cover herself with the sheet while mumbling his name. The other man simply adjusted his shirt, without guilt, without embarrassment. Daniel didn't scream. Didn't cry. Didn't ask why. He simply looked at them both with dry eyes, like someone silently watching a collapse. And he said, with the calm voice of someone who finally understood everything, "Now you can dance as much as you want." And he turned his back. He left the house unhurriedly. He left his ring on the dining table and took nothing but his wallet and car keys. He felt no anger, only a lingering emptiness. He drove for hours aimlessly, trying to understand when the woman who shared his dreams became a stranger, when he stopped being home to her and became a cold wall. The phone rang several times that night. He didn't answer. The next day, she showed up at work. She waited outside the building. When he came out, she tried to reach him, asked to talk, said that what he saw wasn't what it seemed. Daniel didn't answer. He simply got in his car and drove away. The following days were a painful repetition of her attempts and his refusals. She sent messages asking him to explain, saying she was confused, that it had all started unintentionally, that her boss had been insistent, that she felt alone and lost, that she had been weak, that she hated herself for it. Daniel read them all but didn't respond. Until, a week later, she appeared at the door of the new apartment he had rented. She wasn't crying. She was different. More dejected. More empty. He opened the door, let her in, and sat down. She looked around, realizing nothing there belonged to their story. A new home, a new beginning, with no trace of her. And then she began to speak. She said she didn't know when she lost control. That her boss started with discreet compliments, subtle invitations to meetings after hours, jokes that tested boundaries. She said she backed away at first, but that over time, she felt seen in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. She started getting ready with his gaze in mind, that she felt a kind of selfish and dangerous validation. She said she never wanted to leave Daniel, but that she was being carried away by something she mistook for freedom. And when she realized it, she was in too deep. She apologized. She asked for more than forgiveness. She asked for a miracle. Daniel listened to everything. Carefully. Without interrupting. When she finished, he simply said he needed peace and that there was no more room within him to return to the past. She cried. She told him she still loved him. That she would love him for the rest of her life. He responded gently but firmly, "What you love is the man I was with you." But he no longer exists. Life went on. For him, slowly. With difficult days. With sleepless nights. But it went on. Until, months later, he met someone. An unpretentious encounter in a cafe, like the one from many years ago. But now with less haste, less idealization. A different kind of love. Calm. Light. Sincere. Her name was Claire. She had an open smile and eyes that didn't need to hide anything. With her, Daniel relearned to walk slowly, to trust, to build without haste. Emily knew, of course. She knew from friends, from social media, from the looks of acquaintances who had changed direction. But she said nothing. She simply observed, from afar, what she had lost. Until one day, late in the afternoon, without warning, she appeared again. Alone. Hair tied back, no makeup, dressed simply. She asked for just 5 minutes. Daniel hesitated, but then allowed it. She came in, looked around, and said she just wanted to see for herself if he was okay. She said she thought about him every day. That she reminisced about little moments. That she caught herself listening to old songs and secretly reviewing photos on her phone. She said she still dreamed of his laugh. And then, looking into his eyes, she whispered, "You were my person. And I let you slip through my fingers like sand. I hate myself for it." Daniel came closer. He held her hands. Not out of love, but out of respect. And he replied softly, "You were mine too. But now we're just stories of each other." She wept as if finally understanding the depth of the void she'd created. There was nothing more to say. She was gone. But unlike the other times, she didn't ask to come back. Because now she knew. She knew the loss was final. Weeks later, chance would have it that they met again. Daniel and Claire were walking hand in hand in a park when they saw Emily sitting alone on a bench, holding an album. He hesitated, considered turning away, but Claire encouraged him to continue. As they approached, Emily looked up. She was thin, pale, with the sunken eyes of someone who hadn't slept well. They stared at each other for endless seconds. Claire sweetly greeted Emily, who tried to smile. Daniel simply nodded, speechless. Emily closed the album carefully, as if closing a chapter. And then, looking at them both, she simply said, "I'm happy for you." It was a lie. But it was all she could say. That night, as Daniel prepared dinner with Claire, he looked at her and said, "It's strange. I feel like a part of me was buried today. But it's not sadness. It's relief." Claire smiled and replied, "Sometimes, to blossom, we have to let die what is no longer a root." Daniel knew, deep down, that the old pain would still linger for a while. But he also knew he was finally free. Because true love doesn't betray. And when it does, it's already ceased to be love long before the kiss happened. Time moved forward with cruel delicacy, like someone slowly erasing footprints on a wet, sandy road. What was once a shared home became a distant memory, a story that only existed when silence screamed louder than any sound. Daniel now lived in a different house, in a different phase, with different eyes on the world. He carried no anger, no resentment. He had understood that harboring pain is remaining attached to what has already died. The wound that once throbbed in his chest had become a silent scar, the kind that no longer hurts, but is felt every time a gesture of true love is repeated with different intensity, with someone else. Claire was by his side, and with her, he no longer needed to worry if it would be enough. There was no shadow competing with his light, no eyes straying from his. For the first time in a long time, Daniel could love lightly, safely, truly. The days with Claire were simple, yet full of meaning. He discovered he didn't need grandeur to be happy. A conversation at sunset, a hot coffee in the late afternoon, a shared laugh over a silly joke, all of this became enough when the heart was at peace. They decided to travel together, explore new places, see the world with renewed eyes. Each destination was a blank page where he fearlessly wrote a story that needed no repair. And it was in this new narrative that Daniel understood, sometimes, happiness isn't a continuation, but a new beginning. Emily, meanwhile, sank deeper and deeper into the loneliness she'd created. After the final separation, she tried to find meaning in the remnants of her life. She distanced herself from many mutual friends, not by choice, but because most of them chose to stay by Daniel's side, recognizing in him the true glue that held their relationships together. Her family, though present, no longer regarded her with the same admiration. There was a silent frustration, a judgment unspoken but revealed in long glances and short hugs. She tried to continue her career, but even there, the spark had faded. The boss who had once enchanted her with promises and attention had vanished as if nothing had happened. When she tried to reconnect, she found only coldness and indifference. He was already with someone else. And more than that, he treated her like someone who had never truly mattered. Emily's loneliness was the worst form of punishment, not because she was alone, but because she knew she was the author of her own abandonment. She began to frequent the places she used to go with Daniel, perhaps searching for some trace of him that was still there. She sat on the same park benches, ordered the same dishes at restaurants, retraced the same paths, as if in some of these gestures she could reverse time or find solace. But what she found was an echo. Distant voices of memories that now hurt more than they comforted. She tried to move on, tried new relationships, but none lasted more than a few months. Because no one was Daniel. No one loved her with that patience. No one looked at her the way he did. No one knew her silences the way he did. One morning, Emily received a text message from a familiar number. It was an old colleague from the company inviting her to a wedding. Reluctantly, she decided to go. She needed to get out of the house, needed to see new faces. But when she got there, she was surprised by a detail not on the invitation: Daniel was also among the guests. He arrived later, hand in hand with Claire, smiling like someone who'd found the exact place in the world where he belonged. Emily watched them from a distance. She saw the ease with which they treated each other, saw the way she rested her head on his shoulder, saw the smiles that escaped effortlessly. At one point, Claire went to the bathroom, and Daniel was left alone near the dance floor. Emily, moved by an impulse she couldn't even explain, approached. Her heart was pounding as if it were trying to leap out of her throat. He saw her and smiled politely. She asked if she could talk for a moment. He nodded. Emily said she wasn't there to cause any discomfort. She just wanted to say something she hadn't had the courage to say before. She took a deep breath and then said she hoped he would be unhappy without her, that she'd hoped, in the first few months, that he would regret leaving, that he would miss her until he doubled over in pain. But over time, she realized it wasn't him who needed to miss her. It was her. That his absence in her life was a hole impossible to fill. She said she'd learned the hard way that love can't be begged for, tested, or risked. She said she'd lost herself. And that she might never find herself again. Daniel listened in silence. When she finished, he simply replied that he wished her peace. And that, despite everything, he wished her no harm. Emily smiled sadly. She said she knew. That's why she loved him. And she walked away. At the end of that night, as they walked back to the car, Claire asked if everything was okay. Daniel said yes. That talking to Emily had closed a chapter that still had loose ends. And that now, everything inside him felt light. Claire intertwined her fingers with his and said that nothing from the past would define him, because she would choose the Daniel of the present every day. He smiled and said she couldn't imagine how much that meant. In fact, she did. Because she knew that, for him, trusting again was harder than loving. Emily never looked for Daniel again. He moved to another city a few months later. She started a new life far from the traces of her previous one. She began working on small volunteer projects, helping women in vulnerable situations. Perhaps trying, in some way, to rebuild within others what she couldn't maintain within herself. It wasn't redemption. But it was an attempt. She remained alone. But now more aware. More mature. More painfully awake. Daniel and Claire married in an intimate ceremony, surrounded only by those who knew the depths of what they had experienced before they met. There were no exaggerated promises, no eternal vows. Just a commitment to be true, even when love hurts, even when the days are hard. Because they knew, more than anyone, that fidelity isn't about perfection, but about choice. Choosing to love, even when it would be easier to give up. Choosing to stay, even when everything screams escape. And, above all, choosing to respect the one you love, so that there will never be regret for letting something worthwhile slip away. If you've made it this far, leave your thoughts on this story in the comments. We want to hear your thoughts, your pain, or your hope. Subscribe to the channel for more real, intense, and transformative stories like this one. Let this story make you reflect. Betrayal doesn't just destroy a relationship. It erodes everything around it: respect, trust, dreams, peace. And often, even after forgiveness, what was broken never puts itself back together. Losing true love due to an impulsive mistake is like breaking a mirror and trying to see yourself in the shards. You might see something, but you'll never see the whole thing. Never forget, this channel does not support, justify, or romanticize any form of cheating. Our stories are fiction, but the feelings they touch are absolutely real.